Welcome everyone to the latest in our series, Q&A series with PG Wrightson Seeds. I'm Hamish Mulcock from PG Wrightson Seeds, and today we've got Aimee Dawson from the Ballance Agri-Nutrients team joining us. Welcome, Aimee.
Thanks, Hamish.
I thought today it'd be a good opportunity just to discuss a few strategies that could help farmers with some feed supply out there. There's a lot of issues out there at the moment, a lot of challenges. A lot of regions are exiting pretty significant droughts with low pasture covers. Other areas have got a lot of additional stock on hand with COVID-19 and the sort of reduced processing capacity or trading in the industry. And then other areas down south coming out of pretty significant floods down there. There's also pretty poor pasture covers and some pretty average crops. So a couple of things that I thought would be good to go through today would be the how we could utilise strategic nitrogen to fill some of those feed deficits, and then also looking at some of the establishment or undersowing of new crops. So, I mean, it's probably also worth mentioning the feed budgeting service that's out there at the moment, or assistance with feed budgeting that Dairy NZ, Beef and Lamb and AgFirst are providing. So if you do find yourself in a situation with feed supply and demand, it's probably worth getting in contact with one of those organisations to get a hand there. So why don't we now, Aimee, launch into the use of strategic nitrogen this autumn, and some of the discussions that you're having with farmers out there around how that could boost feed supply.
Yeah, definitely. I guess there's a bit of a gap between our supply and demand at the moment, and nitrogen is definitely one of those options that can fill that supply for you. I guess the key things we're talking to farmers about is what their soil temperatures are doing. Are they sitting above 6 degrees? Because then we know we're going to get a reasonable response to nitrogen. And also, how's their soil moisture looking? Because if we're in a drought period, or it's still quite dry and we haven't had that sort of drought breaking rain, then our nitrogen is not going to help our pastures because they're not actually actively growing. And then I guess the other question we're asking is what other nutrients can we supply with that nitrogen if they are looking at using it? Do they need to supply some phosphorus as part of their maintenance, or some sulfur, which needs to go on annually? So that's helping us make some decisions around which products we'd use.
So, I mean, in the South Island at the moment, Aimee, like soil temperatures, they're declining. What sort of opportunities or options out there at the moment?
Yeah, I guess in the South Island, especially on this eastern side, our soil temperatures are starting to decline pretty rapidly, and so our window for nitrogen is starting to close. Likely by the end of May, we won't be seeing any nitrogen going on, purely for that soil temperature reason, but also environmental risk as well. There are some other areas on in the South Island, like on the west coast, where soil temperatures are still reasonable, where nitrogen is still an option for them. So yeah, soil temperature is really going to drive that decision in the South Island. In the North Island, we're still seeing temperatures sitting up above 10 degrees. So we know our response to nitrogen is going to be pretty good, providing that there's good soil moisture. And so nitrogen, really, they've got a larger window up there, probably over the next month.
Okay, and what sort of rates and responses could be expected at this time of the year? Obviously, temperature dependent.
Yeah, so temperature is a real key driver there, and also I guess what your existing nitrogen is in the soil too. So historically, hill country hasn't seen a lot of nitrogen, and so it's generally quite deficient in nitrogen. So any nitrogen you do supply, we tend to see quite a large response from. So if your soil temperatures are sitting pretty good, then you can expect a 15 to 1 response. So that's 15 kilos of dry matter to 1 kilo of nitrogen. So if you know your deficit, then you can get a quick working out on how much nitrogen you need to supply. As our soil temperatures start to drop, our response rate starts to drop as well. And so once we get below 6 degrees Celsius in the soil temperature, then we won't really see a response that's economic, and probably environmentally is not a great option either.
Okay. And what about brassica crops, Aimee? Like, hopefully a lot of the autumn or late summer nitrogen applications have been put on brassica crops, but there's some low yielding crops out there at the moment. What opportunities exist to sort of boost those along?
Yes, it's a question that we've been asked quite a lot, especially over the last couple of weeks, is can we use nitrogen to help boost those crops that haven't done as well as we've expected? And I guess it still comes back to those key questions around soil temperature and soil moisture, but also thinking about what nitrogen's already been supplied to that crop. So if we're in a situation where we've had quite dry periods over summer, that nitrogen that we supplied in spring is likely still sitting in the soil. And when we do get that rain, we'll see a burst of that nitrogen go to that crop and be able to be utilised. So really it's a question around how much nitrogen you've already supplied and will your crop likely respond to that nitrogen. And as we've already discussed, in the South Island, we're slowly running out of that window, and there may be some opportunities in the North Island. But what we do need to consider is when we're going to be grazing that crop. So when we apply nitrogen, especially in this autumn period where our response to it can be a lot less, there is a risk of nitrate poisoning. And so we want to get an understanding of when the farmer is likely to graze that and what the likely response is to reduce our risk.
Yeah, that's a pretty important consideration, because some will be getting pretty close to starting grazing on those crops, particularly if feed supply is quite limited.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Oh no, that's some really good information there. Yeah, just moving on then to the sort of other opportunities to boost that feed supply. That would be just around the establishing new pastures or undersowing. I mean, when it comes to establishing a new pasture, Aimee, like what are some of the sort of key tips around fertilisers at that establishment stage, and then post-emergence, to sort of really get the best out of that pasture renovation or undersowing investment?
Yeah, so when we're establishing any crop or any new pasture, I guess ideally we want to have a soil test, but it's a bit difficult to do in these times. However, if we've got some historical tests there, we can get an understanding of what the existing soil fertility is doing. But as a good rule, we want to make sure when we're ever establishing a new crop or new pastures that we're using phosphorus as close to the seed as possible. So phosphorus doesn't move very far in the soil. So the more closer we have it to the seed, the more likely they're able to access it, and it's going to create good root and shoot development for early establishment. And then supplying nitrogen as well, so that we get that crop out of the ground as quick as possible. So products, especially when we're looking at drilling, are products like DAP, and looking at sort of 100 to 200 kilos per hectare down the drill to just help establish that new pasture. And then when our pastures have come out of the ground, generally what we're looking to do is apply a post-emergence nitrogen. So that's generally after the first graze, and that's just to help, I guess, help with tillering and help with increasing that growth, especially if we're needing that feed supply in winter.
Yep. I mean, the other, got a lot of discussion, particularly in the North Island, around undersowing. So yeah, a lot of our teams have been out there sort of completing a lot of pasture condition scores to make sure that that we are making those correct decisions around undersowing, particularly where we're coming out of droughts, quite open pastures. If the weed presence isn't high, I mean, that's where we've got quite a lot of opportunity to undersow with annuals or Italians or even perennials in some instances, and to provide that sort of a winter feed and then also feed through into the summer and ongoing. The sort of opposite side to that, where we do have to be a bit careful, would be around looking at those pastures where they do have a high weed content, and that's where we'd probably look to spray them out and sow within and resow. But in regards to that undersowing, Aimee, like what would be some of the sort of key principles there around fertiliser use? Is that much the same? Or,
yeah, it's pretty much exactly the same as when we start to establish a new pasture. I guess potentially our fertility is already reasonably good because we've already got an existing pasture in there. So, a lower rate of fertiliser may be required. But in terms of principles, we still want to make sure we've got a good phosphorus source close to the seed, just so that we can help that be as successful as possible. So, yeah, nitrogen and phosphorus.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, there's still opportunities for undersowing up in the North Island. Particularly with Italians or annuals. Yeah, in a lot of the country now, we've really pretty much finished that, finished with the perennials, haven't we? So, I mean, talking about Italians, annuals, oats, things like that, there also comes, there's a bit of risk of nitrate leaching, isn't there? Nitrate poisoning in stock. So what would be some of your key points around that?
Yeah, so I guess sort of similar to what I said around the brassicas. So the thing with our cereals and our Italians is that they tend to be active at a lower soil temperature, and so they're able to utilise a lot of that nitrogen that is sitting within the soil during this autumn period. So what happens with that is that if the nitrogen is applied as fertiliser and we get some nitrate that's taken up into that pasture but not necessarily converted to protein because of lack of sunlight or temperature, then we can have high nitrates in our pastures, and so our risk of grazing them can be high. So I guess one of the things we're looking at is timing between the application of fertiliser and grazing, and also thinking about when during the time of the day are we grazing it. So early morning tends to be a higher risk than later in the afternoon. And so making sure that we've got good supplementary feed on hand. We've got maybe a neighbouring paddock that it can run in and out of. They're not going in there really hungry. And then also making sure that if we do suspect that nitrate poisoning could be a risk, is that we're looking at doing a herbage test and sending that away to Hills Lab to get analysed, or getting our vets in to come and have a look and do those in situ testing.
Yep. So the Hills test would be the premium test to give you the...
Yeah, that will give you the most accurate information, but obviously there's a delay in getting that result back, so it depends on how quickly you need to graze it.
Cool. Yep. No, some really good information there, Aimee. So, I mean, that pretty much wraps up the session today. Was there any other sort of comments you had, Aimee?
Yeah, I guess just Ballance is open for business through this lockdown period, and it's an awesome opportunity for us to be involved with farmers. And if you do need any help, please feel free to ring us, and we're happy to help.
Oh, that's great. Well, if anyone does have any questions, feel free to write them below, or get in contact with the Ballance Agri-Nutrient or Pastures and Seeds teams, and we'll be more than happy to help and answer those. So thanks for tuning in today, and look forward to catching up with you soon. Cheers.
Thanks.